It's my voice. It's just a head cold, I promise. I had a COVID test, but every 2 hours. It's the semi-annual, like once every 2 years head cold. The only thing I ever get, but it's crazy. Sounds like
We are live.
I'm sure it feels like that. It does.
We are live. We're ready? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Call to order the meeting of the NVTA Finance Committee for Thursday, January 11th, 2024. Almost forgot what year it was. First, we have approval of the October 12th, 2023 draft minutes. Are there any changes or corrections? Do we have a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Longy is joining us remotely. Mr. Longy, would you care to go over the Finance Committee meeting schedule?
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle. This is tying the Finance Committee meeting basically to the same schedule. We may need to adjust at certain times during the General Assembly session, I think, for the workload between GPC and Finance, but we'll make those adjustments as we need to.
Is the meeting schedule agreeable to everyone in the committee?
It is.
Okay, do we need a motion then?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carried. Thank you. Next, moving on to FY25 budget guidance. Mr. Longy.
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle, and my apologies for not being able to be there in person. I'm sure you've probably heard my wife has come down with COVID, and I didn't think you'd want me sitting in a small room like you're in with that level of exposure. So to start off this item, this is the discussion stage of the budget preparation, where we actually present to the committee kind of on a narrative basis the ideas for fiscal 25. To go through the local distribution and the regional revenue fund budget, I really have no updates on those. We are waiting for a revenue estimate for the Interstate Operations and Enhancement Program, which comes from VDOT. And it's one of our 4 state revenues, our revenues that we get from the state. We don't have that number yet. But, and that is a component of those 2 budgets that we need to have in place in order to give you some valid information. Looking at the operating budget, which is a very small component of our overall revenue, the operating budget we typically present on a base budget basis as well as enhancements for the years. The biggest changes in the base budget is really going to be related to the lease, which we are hoping to wrap up. And I do want to note that your council of council is behind you, and they have been doing a great amount of work to working with the landlord and trying to move that item to conclusion. We typically work through other operating budget items in the order that they are on the chart of accounts, because when we have that spreadsheet, we just kind of work down all of the numbers. The first one is salaries. We are proposing a 7%, and that's a budget number. And that doesn't mean that everybody will get 7%, but a 7% increase in salary compensation. The reason for that is what we have done every fiscal year is basically looking to see what the chief administrative officers for the cities and the counties are putting out in their budgets, kind of align ourselves to that, and then make any changes as they come due. But that budget, that initial number ends up being a maximum, essentially. What has happened in the last, especially the last 2 fiscal years, is that the proposed chief administrative officer's budget was a lot lower than what was actually passed in the jurisdictions. And so what we are finding is we're not keeping pace with the same type of positions we have with our member jurisdictions. So that is the reason for the proposed 7% increase this year. Any questions?
I do, Madam Chair. I mentioned that to our CFO, and she felt that was a pretty high number compared to what we were expecting. So I understand it's a ceiling and not a guarantee, but I think folks that point needs to be underscored at this point.
Well, my question would be, that 7% is a high number. I agree with that. My question would be, is it that high because we're trying to bring the staff here in line with what their counterparts are making? And so otherwise, in other words, there are times you may have a significant increase one time to bring people in line, and then you kind of go, and then you kind of steady it out from there. If I heard Mr. Lungy right, when the comparison was done with the counterpart, with NVTA employees' counterparts, they were falling behind. And if I'm hearing right, that 7%, which normally would be a fairly large increase, is an increase that large to bring them in line. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct, Chair Randall. We are trying to maintain parity with the 7%.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can comment on the parity aspect of it. Last year, Manassas Park provided 6% for our staffers because we still have not achieved parity with surrounding localities. So just want to comment.
And if I may, Madam Chair,
yes.
I'm assuming parity is the average that their colleagues or their counterparts are making. Parity is not at the top end or the low end, it's the average. And so this is to bring them to the average.
Correct. What we do when we compare our increases to the member jurisdictions, we definitely exclude a jurisdiction that may have gone through a salary analysis and is doing their own catch up. We try to keep it to what the merit increases are as well as cost of livings. Some jurisdictions blend those two into one number. Some have a separate number for each category. And then we also try to exclude, outliers, that a jurisdiction may be going through some financial difficulty, and so is not able to provide a pay increase. We would drop that from the average calculation. So kind of look at it as exclude the highs, the one-time highs, and exclude the one-time lows, and then we use the average of what's left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reason why I raised it is really to prepare for the discussion that may occur when that number appears. And so I would just urge staff to be really prepared to justify whatever number is being proposed.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Understood. Any other comments? Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Longy.
Benefits also kind of moves with obviously the salaries. It's just we're noting that a lot of our benefits that aren't tied to salary obviously are things like insurance, et cetera, that is a quote that's provided to us. It's not driven by pay increases. Professional outreach, we have noticed that as the recognition of the authority is growing, our staff, and especially our CEO, is getting invitations to present and tell the authority story and talk about Northern Virginia and what Northern Virginia is doing for transportation purposes. And so we're looking at breaking this budget category out and call it professional outreach, where we are going out into either the region or even nationally to tell the NVTA story. And we're separating it. Currently, those expenses were part of professional development and training, so we're proposing to separate those two out.
That's a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Logie, first of all, we have such a good story to tell for a lot of reasons, and That's because of Ms. Backman and the staff. The story is a very good story, and I think we should get that story out. When other organizations or entities ask our staff, or I mean the NVTA staff to come out, are they not covering some of those costs themselves?
They typically do. It's either a reduced cost or a no cost for the conference. Maybe there's a special pricing on the hotel
Yeah.
accommodations if that's involved.
Okay.
But it's still a net cost.
Right, like if they'll comp you for the cost of registration, but then you have to get there and pay your housing or lodging, I should say.
Okay.
Or sometimes they will comp you at a discount, just those types of things.
Listen, tell them if they want all this extra. They pay for all of it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
The
Mr.
other-
Snyder.
The other suggestion would be that for this budget item, that you have one or two examples of where it's not just going to give a speech, but it has a tangible benefit to the people in the region. So just be ready, because this is often a budget item that gets attention as well.
And thank you for that, Mr. Snyder. And I would say it's reciprocal, because we learn things as well that we bring back and try to incorporate into our processes.
Any other comments? Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Longer.
On the office lease, basically, I'm recapping the wording that we discussed in closed session without any details or numbers. As the lease goes through, we will be getting a large payment from the landlord, and part of that will be used with the move and outfitting the new office. Then I expect to have a balance there that will come back to the committee with some recommendations on whether we pay off a greater amount of current year rent or work it down over time. A lot of it depends on how those numbers flush out. I do want to emphasize we are setting up a separate accounting structure within our books for this, and we will obviously bring it to the auditor's attention to make sure that you get a special report on how that money is used and how it was used and what's left, etc. So we'll be obviously very transparent on that. I just don't have other than for budget purposes, I am going to have to put the rent in, which would be approximately $38,000 a month. I'll have to put that in as a whole budget number and then work the adjustments off of that as things wrap up to conclusion. The difficulty here is this is definitely going to cross 2 fiscal years as well.
Oh, yeah, it is, yeah.
Comments or questions? No, okay. Please continue, Mr. Longy.
Okay, the last item in the base budget is professional development and training. We have, since the last increase in this budget line, which was fiscal 2020, we've added 5 additional staff, but we did not include additional funds for professional development and training. And this is the funds that are used to keep our staff's certifications current, to keep them, up to date on their technology, on the technology that's out there. And this is true training money. One of the things that we have seen, and this is, we were talking about conferences and stuff, a lot of the conferences post-COVID have gone online, which is what kept this cost down for the last several years. But those online conferences are now charging about what they used to charge for in-person.
What a ripoff.
Now, you do have obviously some savings for lack of not having to pay for travel. But frankly, because we are DC based, we oftentimes pick up conferences that many people in the nation have to travel to. They're local for us because we're in the DC metro area. But we are looking at some increases here, basically to, we're starting to see the costs come in, and the fact that the nation's loosening up and people are traveling, and some conferences are occurring. That's it for the base budget. If we're ready to talk about new initiatives.
Yes, Mr. Longy, go ahead.
So our new initiatives are basically somewhat preparing us for the upcoming update for the authority's strategic plan. I know the staff is starting to work on that. It'll be something that will be starting this calendar year and probably conclude in next beginning of next calendar year, which would be the end of the fiscal year. What we're looking at is, again, continuing to establish NVTA's ability to work with federal and state grants that are outside of the revenue stream, which has, we're in pretty good shape accounting structure-wise for that, but we do not have a lot of the personnel time, personnel capacity, and in some cases, knowledge. Continuing to work with the transportation technology pilots and putting forward deployment plans. Establishing a list of pre-qualified on-call consultants in academic institutions. So, that's a big procurement lift. And any money that's spent on those would come in front of the authority on an individual basis, but we want to build that infrastructure. We also want to make those on-call institutions available to member jurisdictions so that potentially they can use it to help streamline their own projects, especially those funded with NVTA funds. And then looking at establishing independent and objective research programs to continue to flush out the regional transportation plan and the policies and prioritizations of future authority investments. For that, we are looking for 2 positions in the planning group and 1 position in the finance group. Especially for the planning side, these positions will actually free up our principal transportation planner, which is Keith, and his deputy, Shree. So part of this is to allow them to not have to be doing routine things like screening reimbursement requests, doing some of the technology stuff, directly hands-on, but allow them to function at the higher level. I mean, we are very fortunate with Mr. Jasper's experience and Shree's experience, and also recognizing that Shree is now Dr. Shree. We have a lot of capacity there, but a lot of that capacity is actually captured in more routine functions. That said, one of those positions will be focused on the grant and program monitoring. One of the things that we're not doing a very good job of is making sure that the assets that the authority has essentially purchased are still there and being used. That is a requirement of the state code that we are supposed to monitor our fiscal interest in those assets. The other one is a regional transportation planner, which is a position that's kind of the jack of all trades within the planning group. But that would support the grant and program monitoring and allow us basically to have better project monitoring. We quite frankly don't have the capacity to keep tabs on all of the projects that the authority has approved and that are in the pipeline. I have been asked a couple times as CFO, when do you think the authority is going to hit its growth point? And I think the easiest way for me to address that is when we are clearing through completion roughly the same amount of projects that we are adopting. And we are way far away from that point. We have so many more, literally billions of dollars worth of projects in the pipeline. And they do seem to be having trouble reaching the finish line. The other position that we're asking for is a business and fiscal analyst. This does kind of go off the same theme. What we are looking for in this position, and Ms. Teal and I put a lot of work in this, but we couldn't find the job description, is a generalist. One of the things that Ms. Teal and I brought to our positions was the fact that we've had very broad experiences. As I've said, you can hire an accountant to do bookkeeping, but you can't hire a bookkeeper to do accounting. There are different levels of activities. And so what this position will allow us to do is Ms. Teal and I to focus on the higher level aspects of our duties, but it will also, we are looking for somebody who will have procurement experience. We are getting into procurements now that are much more complex than what we've seen in the past, which is a good thing. A lot of human resource benefits management. The laws are constantly changing, so it's very difficult for us to keep our skills up to date in those arenas, without the additional resource. So with that, that's pretty much a recap of the new initiatives boiled down to frankly, those three positions.
Comments or questions? Mr. Longy, are you doing next steps?
Yeah, for next steps, we will come back next month. I heard Councilmember Snyder's comments on being prepared. But the next step in February, we'll come back with that famous spreadsheet, and we'll have some supplemental data points for you along the lines of the compensation, as well as the public outreach and the other items. So we'll fully cost out the budget for our February meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Longy. We really appreciate all the work the staff puts into the fiscal year budgets every single year. Thank you very much for that. Are there any final questions on the FY25 budget guidance item? Okay. Moving on, we have monthly investment portfolio report, Ms. Sam.
Thank you, Mayor Shen. The Feds have finally stopped raising rates, increasing the rates, and then yeah.
I don't ever run for office.
But they did hint about a rate cut starting this year. So our strategy at this point of time is to go in for a lock-in a longer duration, like 3 to 4 years, so that we can get higher rates in before the Feds even start doing the reduction. So yeah, that's all our strategy at this point of time.
Any comments or questions? No. Thank you very much. Monthly revenue report, Mr. Long, you want to roll those next two sort of into one?
Certainly, I'll to briefly recap the revenues. I think you would hear from me if I were to speak in detail the same thing you have already heard from your local staff. Grantor's tax is really struggling. We're fortunate that sales tax continues to perform. Overall, we are 3.7% above our budget projections. So I think we're in a healthy place. There has been some discussion, and I'll just call it negative discussion, for the future prospects of sales tax. I think a lot of that is based on national and state data. The Northern Virginia region's history for sales tax has been very strong. It has taken something like sequestration, 9/11, major events like that, the .com meltdown, for us to have a single year of negative growth. And we really do not experience back-to-back years of negative growth. So while it's clear that sales tax growth is bailing out the lack of robustness in grantor's tax, And hopefully that will turn around as well, at least on a residential level. That should turn around with rates starting to drop. So overall, I think we're in a good place. At this point, I'm not real worried about the revenue picture. On the operating budget, we're in a better place. We are 41% of the way through the fiscal year, and we've only used 32% of the operating budget. Most of that is because we've got some major initiatives that are such as the website modernization that are just wrapping up their procurement stage. So that money, hasn't started to be spent yet. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Comments or questions? Okay, there are none. Mr. Longy, thank you. Ms. Backman, do you have anything to report?
Madam Chair, I will be brief. I would just like to thank the Council of Councils. We've leaned on them a lot recently with these lease negotiations. I mean, it's a lot. And thank Mr. Longy, just trying to get us at a place that works for us and works for our future landlords. So I do want to thank, because I know you all have other jobs and we don't pay you. So I do want to thank the council. Yeah. So I do want to thank, because it has taken a lot of time. And of course, when you're doing something of this magnitude, you want it to be right on the front end to eliminate problems on the back end. And we've been able to keep the train running. So I do want to say thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Backman. And we all thank staff as well for their hard work. We thank Council of Councils for all of your hard work. Very much appreciated. Is there any other business to come before the committee? If not, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.